All right, we're really grateful to be leading today with Dr. Nicola Henry, who's joining us from Australia. So it's very early there, and we're truly grateful and appreciate that you're joining us so early this morning. Dr. Nicola Henry is a professor of global studies and deputy director of the Social Equity Research Centre at RMIT University, Australia. Her research focuses on technology facilitated gender based violence, including image based sexual abuse, sextortion, and AI generated sexual harms. She has led multiple national and international studies examining the prevalence, impacts, and prevention of digital abuse and works closely with policymakers, technology companies, and frontline services. Nicola is the co-developer of UmaBot, a survivor-centered chatbot designed to support people affected by image-based abuse, and her work is grounded in feminist and design justice approaches to technology. Following the keynote, we'll be joined by Deepa Mattu, who will join Nicola in a fireside chat, a chat that aims to focus on how AI is being engaged in GBV work with attention to survivor-centered approaches, risk, and trauma-informed practice. We're really looking forward to it. Nicola, welcome.
Thank you so much, Margareta. And I also wanted to say thank you to Elder Gloria for the beautiful description of the history of the sash and the beautiful prayer. And I also wanted to welcome you all as well. It's so lovely to see in the chat all the different locations where you're joining from and all the different organizations as well. Now, I will just mention that I have got 3 cats and a dog, and I can hear them running around behind me. I think they're a little bit confused about why I'm up so early. So hopefully they will behave themselves for the presentation. Next slide, please. So before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the people of the Woi Wurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, on whose unceded lands I conduct my business in Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge their long-standing and rich cultural and spiritual historical connection to this land. Next slide, please. I know there's already been some information about support services, but I do want to mention that my presentation today will cover topics related to intimate images and online abuse, and some of the content may be confronting or distressing, so please take care of yourself during the presentation. You're welcome, of course, to zone out, to take a break, or to do whatever you need to do. I've divided this presentation into 2 parts. The first part will be focused on the ways in which AI is used to enact harm. And then the second part will be focused on the ways in which AI is used to address and remedy harm. Next slide, please. So technology facilitated gender-based violence, and I know this was covered yesterday beautifully by Susie Dunn in the morning and by other presenters yesterday. So I'll just go through this very quickly. But TFGBV, technology facilitated gender-based violence, encompasses a range of behaviours including cyberstalking, image-based sexual abuse, online rape threats, and online sexual harassment. More recently, artificial intelligence, or AI, has emerged as another tool that facilitates these harms. So AI can be used to create fake sexual imagery of adults and also of children. AI can be used to impersonate another person, to deceive, threaten, or abuse. So for instance, AI-generated fake porn has been used as a way to catfish or dupe unsuspecting individuals who don't realize that the person in the image is not actually real or is not actually who they say they are. So romance scams is a good example of that. Algorithmic targeting is also involved, where systems select targets and tailor harassment, sexualized messaging, intimidation, or blackmail. And AI technologies are also allow perpetrators to scale attacks, generating automated harassment or targeted sexualized messaging through bot swarms and other ways on social media. And I know this was talked about yesterday, but AI can also be used to manipulate smart home devices For instance, locking doors, controlling lighting or appliances, or accessing security cameras. AI tools can also be used to track phone locations, analyze communication patterns, and of course, in the context of the home, be used to film and create intimate images. As a result, AI doesn't just reproduce existing patterns of gender-based violence, it also creates new types of harms, new types of perpetrators, and this poses significant challenges to law enforcement and prevention. But I'm going to spend the next 5 or so minutes focusing on one form of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. I'm going to focus on AI-generated image-based sexual abuse. Next slide, please. Deep fakes refers to the creation of fake or realistic-looking photos or videos using AI. The term originated in 2017 when a Reddit user under the name of deepfakes created a subreddit to share AI-generated videos that superimpose the faces of celebrities onto the bodies of adult pornography performers. AI-generated deepfake content is produced by algorithms trained on extensive data sets of photos, video, audio, or text. And once trained, these algorithms can generate new content either by modifying existing images or existing media, or by producing entirely new outputs, videos, text, photos, in response to user prompts. Our team use the term AI-generated image-based sexual abuse. We use that as an umbrella term that refers to the non-consensual creation or sharing of synthetic nude or sexual photos or videos, but it also includes threats to share AI-generated images as well. Next slide, please. 5 years ago, creating deepfakes required technical skill, powerful computers, and a lot of images of the target. Now, non-consensual AI-generated sexualized content can be created in 3 main ways. The first is through notified tools and chatbots that are available on app sites and websites that use AI to digitally remove clothing from existing images at the request of users. The second way is through deepfake generators that use deep learning to manipulate existing photos or videos or audio to depict a person doing or saying something that they've not actually done or said. So this can include things like swapping faces, voice cloning, and also altering body features and movements. And the third way that non-consensual sexualized imagery can be created is through generative AI tools that can create entirely new synthetic content that looks like a real person. So unlike the Nudify apps, which alter existing images, or the deepfake generators, which manipulate existing media, generative AI can produce entirely new content from scratch through the input of textual prompts or reference images. This means that fake sexualized images can be created even if no photograph or video of the person exists in that context, which of course makes detection, attribution, and prevention a significant challenge. Some of these image generators have so-called guardrails in place, so things that are rules that will prevent the creation of harmful content. So this might include filters that block the generation of sexualized or violent imagery. But some of these deepfake generators that use generative AI lack these protections entirely, and these generators can also be easily fine-tuned to bypass restrictions. And related to the harms that are caused through the generation of fake, non-consensual sexualized content, there is also the large-scale and non-consensual scraping of personal data, including social media images, that are used to train the AI systems. Some of these AI tools are also freely available on legitimate websites that host open source software. There's also the dark web and other encrypted spaces where offenders exchange with each other fine-tuned models to create child sexual abuse, AI-generated child sexual abuse material or abuse material of adults. They also exchange guidebooks with step-by-step tutorials and also exchange nudifying tools. Next slide, please. I will just mention that I did use AI to create this image. All of the text is mine, but you can see that their AI does hallucinate, does make mistakes, and so I honestly spent so long on this. But you can see that there's a few errors on here, and I've left them in there just to show that yeah, we have to be careful about relying on AI. And as I described in the second part of the presentation, there are lots of good things about AI as well. So AI helping me, for example, to create a slide that I think I would have struggled to do so in PowerPoint. So I'm going to here talk about some of the evidence and trends around so-called deepfake abuse. According to several studies and several reports, the majority of all deepfakes on the internet are non-consensual sexualized fake videos of women, mostly but not exclusively of well-known women, including actors and musicians. So-called deepfake porn is growing in popularity. So according to a 2023 report by a startup organization called Home Security Heroes, there were over 95,000 deepfake videos online in 2023, representing a 550% increase since 2019. A report by another firm called Graphica found, I think it was last year, that there was a 2,000% increase in the number of links promoting websites that use AI to create non-consensual intimate images. In that same study, they found that those sites, those deepfake, non-consensual sexualized imagery sites, had 24 million unique visitors in September last year alone. There have actually been very few studies, empirical studies, measuring the prevalence and impacts of AI-generated image-based abuse, and partly this is because it's a relatively new phenomenon. I'll go through two studies. One is a study by Thorn, which is a not-for-profit organization working on addressing online harms against children. They recently conducted a study in the US. They found that 1 in 17 teens in their study reported that they'd had deepfake nudes created of them without their consent. They found that 84% of teens believe that deepfake nudes are harmful. While most of the teens that they surveyed recognized that harm, 16% of respondents still believe that these images are not real and therefore are not serious. Among the 2% of young people who admitted to creating deepfake nudes without consent of another person, those people said that they'd learned about the tools through app stores, search engines, and social media platforms, just demonstrating how easy it is to access these, particularly these nudify tools. Victims often stay silent, the study found. They found that nearly 2/3 or 62% of young people said that they would tell a parent if it happened to them, but in reality, only 34% of the victims that they surveyed said that they did tell a parent. We conducted a survey. This was a collaboration between RMIT University and also Google. We're still working on publishing our findings from the study. It was a large population survey in Australia, the UK, and the US with over 7,000 respondents. And I'll just go through some of our key findings. First of all, we found that 3.2% of respondents admitted to perpetrating AI-generated image-based abuse. So that was either creating deepfake, non-consensual sexual content of another person without their consent, sharing that content, or threatening to share that content. And interestingly, we found in the UK there were higher rates compared to Australia and the US. We found that men and people under the age of 35 were more likely to report being perpetrators. For instance, men were 4 times more likely to perpetrate this form of abuse compared to women. Common motivations for that the perpetrator respondents cited in our study were, first of all, experimenting with the technology. That was the main motivation that was reported, followed by showing off, followed by because they thought it was funny or they thought it was a joke. But there were malicious motivations that were mentioned by this survey respondents. So things like coercive control, intent to cause reputational harm, and also monetization. So trying to make money off the content. What was interesting about our study, and I have to say, not that surprising, but it might be surprising to you. And I say not surprising to me just because I've done a lot of surveys and studies on image-based abuse more broadly, and it's a common finding around that men are more likely to be victims of to report victimization of image-based abuse more broadly. But we also found in our perpetration part of our study that the perpetrators were more likely to report that the target was a man compared to a woman. And you'll remember at the beginning of this slide that I mentioned that most of the content, the deep fake, non-consensual content online is predominantly of women. This is actually in contrast, this finding. But what it tells us is that the higher rate of reported perpetration against men may reflect the contextual differences in how AI-generated image-based abuse manifests. So on the one hand, you have on deepfake websites, on pornography websites, and on the public-facing visible websites where intimate images of women are being shared. But then you have the more kind of private context. You also have in peer context where men are creating images of each other as a joke, as a prank, or as a form of cyberbullying. Um, so these contexts are important to take into account. They're important for shaping how we respond to this problem, how we prevent it, and also how we think about impacts and harms as well. We also found in our study that content is most likely to be shared by everyday private platforms like group chats, one-to-one messages, cloud storage, and social media. And finally, before I move on, 18% of respondents in our study reported deliberately viewing non-consensual sexual deepfakes, and they did so out of curiosity, followed by sexual harassment, followed by amusement. We found that men were more likely to deliberately view deepfake pornography, as were those under the age of 35 and also LGBTQ plus people. Next slide, please. I've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to go through this very quickly and then move on to the second part of the presentation. But I do want to just show this slide just to give what I've kind of visualized as different solutions to this problem. Essentially, there is no single fix. Meaningful prevention and responses requires coordinated action across law, platform and users, and accountability needs to be located across technology developers, technology companies, individual users, but also government and also society more broadly. I will just quickly use the example of Grok, and most of you will be aware of this case, but for those of you who aren't, I'll briefly tell you what happened. Grok is an AI chatbot that was developed by Elon Musk, his XAI, and integrated into his social media platform X, formerly Twitter. Grok was found to be generating non-consensual sexually explicit AI images of people, including women and minors. Users supplied photos and simple prompts that then enabled the removal of clothing through the chatbot or the insertion of sexualized scenes. Now, there's a lot more I could say about the Grok case, and I know that Susie mentioned this yesterday. But I will just talk very briefly about the criminal and civil and platform governance approaches to addressing this issue. So in many countries around the world, states have opened an investigation into this case on the basis that, at least in some jurisdictions, AI-generated image-based abuse violates state deepfake and decency laws, as well as child sexual abuse material laws. So the European Commissioner and Ofcom, the UK regulator, for instance, have separately launched a formal investigation to assess whether X and Grok adequately mitigated the risks of illegal and harmful content with potential fines and enforcement action. And some countries, including Malaysia and Indonesia, have temporarily blocked access to Grok. There are also, of course, criminal and civil penalties in place for users in some countries and in some jurisdictions for the non-consensual creation or sharing or threats to share of AI-generated image-based abuse material. In Australia, for example, we have a bit of a patchwork of legislation here. We have most states and territories have broader image-based abuse laws, which make it clear that an intimate image can also be an image that is digitally altered. But only in 3 states in Australia do we have criminal offences in place for the non-consensual creation of digitally altered or AI generated non-consensual intimate images. And I know in Canada, there's also different laws across the states. But I just wanted to mention what the context is in Australia. Now, I won't go into the platform and technical or the education and cultural change solutions. There's plenty of information about that. I'm happy to share articles that I have as well on that. But I am going to move to talking about user and survivor support as the 4th kind of pillar of solutions on the screen, and talking a little bit about, and I will talk maybe more in the chat with Deepa about design justice principles. But I am going to talk about a chatbot that I developed in 2022. Next slide, please. So this chatbot, the origins of the chatbot, I'll just briefly explain what those origins were. My team and I conducted interviews with 75 victim survivors of image-based sexual abuse in Australia, New Zealand, and the UK in 2018 and 2019 as part of an Australian Research Council discovery project. I've also conducted more recently interviews as part of a future fellowship project, also funded by the Australian Research Council. And what those interviews have really demonstrated to me is the following. Victim survivors often don't know that what has happened to them is wrong or is criminal offence. Victim survivors often don't know whether anything can be done about the problem. They don't know where to go for help. They feel overwhelmed by the information that they can find online or that they can't find online. They often experience judgment and victim blaming from other people, including people that they trust. For many victim survivors, they don't want to talk to anyone about their experiences. And yet most of the people that we spoke to, of course, want the issue to go away. They want the content to be taken down, removed, or deleted. And they also want offenders to be held accountable, and they want to prevent further harm happening to other people. Next slide, please. So in 2022, we developed YumiBot. It's an AI chatbot that provides information, support, and general advice to victim survivors, as well as bystanders and as well as perpetrators of image-based abuse. So we released YumiBot on the 1st of December 2022. And you wouldn't believe it, but the day before ChatGPT was released, so ChatGPT was released on the 30th of November, the day before. Now, we, of course, did not know that. The release of ChatGPT has completely revolutionized chatbot technology. So if you do happen to go on and have a little play with YumiBot and experiment with YumiBot, you'll see that the chatbot technology is quite different to generative AI, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But in terms of this chatbot, this is version 1, YumiBot version 1. Yumi provides a range of information and support and general advice on topics like image-based abuse. So what is it? How it relates to terms like revenge porn and sextortion and deep fake. So can provide information about the terminology, which can be very, very confusing, even to those of us who've been working this space for a very long time. UmiBot provides information about the laws in Australia, both criminal and civil. Yumi provides information about reporting options, including the role and the powers of the Australian E-Safety Commissioner, and also provides support options, not just for image-based abuse, so helplines and hotlines and where to go for help. But Yumi also provides information about mental health, about domestic and sexual violence, and other harms that often intersect with image-based sexual abuse. We have tailored content for sex workers, for older Australians, younger Australians. So we have two pathways, one for under 18s, one for over 18s, with information for those who might be at risk of honour violence and domestic and family violence. We have information for LGBTQ plus people that's been specifically tailored. And I should also mention that Yumi's content is and learning is very controlled. So UmiBot version 1 only learns from what we teach UmiBot. So we manually input the learning rather than automatic learning. There's no learning from users, and we did this to ensure that UmiBot would not go rogue. We basically have a 500-page Word document. We also have a resources section as well, as you can see on the top of the screen. And so the downside to this is that Yumi does not use generative AI, so doesn't interact dynamically with users. But the upside, of course, is that we can control more tightly the information that's delivered to users. So from 1st of December to 2022 until yesterday, UmiBot had over 7,300 conversations with more than 5,900 individual discrete users in over 75 countries, including Australia. Next slide, please. Next slide, I'll skip this. That was a demo that I had created. I don't even know if it was going to work. But I do, before I end, want to just share UmiBot version 2. We have, last year in 2025, we got a very small amount of money to prototype a new version of UmiBot that uses generative AI. This is a very early stage. It's youth focused, so it's for young people. It's a help-seeking chatbot. It integrates what's known as retrieval augmented generation, so RAG. That's the architecture in which UmiBot version 2 uses. It's not available live at the moment because it's just a prototype. We're testing it. We did some focus groups with young people to get their feedback on how it's working. And we're hoping to get more funding to be able to do a lot of testing, to do co-design with young people, to do focus groups, to do interviews, to do surveys, to really understand what young people's needs are, and also to develop a tool that is safe, that is private. In a nutshell, UmiBot version 2 is different to UmiBot version 1, as I said, because it uses generative AI, but it's still done in a controlled way. We use safety guardrails. We have a curated, legally verified knowledge base, and we have multi-tier safeguards. For example, rule-based filters, structured interactions, and trauma-informed language as well. Next slide, please. So to end, I am just presenting the slide. I know that Deepa and I will be talking in more detail about design justice. I have co-authored an article discussing design justice in relation to the development of UmiBot version 1. It's available in open access. You can just type in design justice, Nicola Henry, and UmiBot, and you'll be able to access that article. And I'm happy to provide the links to Margarita later. But essentially, these were the principles of which we focused at the development of UmiBot version 1, as well as the development of UmiBot version 2. And as I said, I'm happy to talk about that with you, Deepa, as we discuss more in our fireside chat. Thanks so much. End of slides. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Henry, Nicola. I think I'll call you Nicola for rest of our
Please
talk.
do.
I just wanted to thank for this very grounding, very practical keynote message. Something that I really enjoyed about your talk, and full disclosure, I had the opportunity to have a framework of what you were going to discuss today. So your framing of AI both has a space of harm and a place of facilitator of harm, but as also as a site of intervention really resonates for many of us because many of us are struggling navigating this real-time tension between innovation, safety, trauma-informed practice in the GBV work while we are all trying to understand how much and how do you incorporate or do you incorporate AI in your work. So, a couple of very quick reflections from me. You have given us so much to think about deep fakes, synthetic impersonations, automated harassment, and also thinking about solutions that are rooted in some diverse modalities. You talked about law, regulation, role of education, technology, and survivor support. I think for many of us, including me, fighting AI with AI was inspiring and thoughtful. I think many of us will use it for times to come. So over the next 20 minutes, I would love to explore a few of these ideas with you in a bit more conversational style. I have some notes here that I'll be reading from, but maybe I'll also be incorporating some questions that have been arising since yesterday. And I think this is the first one, which is a bit of elephant in the room kind of a question. From the design justice perspective, what does it take to keep an AI tool genuinely survivor centered while we are also trying to confront systemic biases, especially for people with intersectional identities? We are talking about race, class, disability, immigration status, and limited digital access. And I'll make it even more complex for you because the layer of that is the whole ethical use of AI and can use of AI be ever feminist? So if you can answer this really complicated question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love your question. I think it's so important to think about how do we design tools that can they be feminist? And I'll hopefully be able to answer that. I'll get to that at the end. But also, how do we ensure that AI tools remain survivor-centered, and how do we address the biases within these tools? I guess one thing I would just say before I kind of answer that question is that there are big challenges. And I think one of the big challenges is that not all survivors are alike. So I mentioned in my presentation about, deep fake abuse, that we have, kind of people, different contexts. We've got kind of the violence against women framework where people are creating and sharing fake synthetic non-consensual content of women as part of a kind of gender-based violence framework. But we also have other contexts where, in peer contexts where people are creating the content of their mates, their friends, because they think it's funny. And so that challenge alone is interesting. We also have kind of new perpetrators. We've got people who never would have maybe engaged in perpetration behaviours, but because the tools are so accessible, that they're experimenting with it. And we've got, young people, for example, using Notify apps and sharing the content that they create with their networks, and then, ending up police knocking on their door and getting suspensions and being expelled from school. And then, of course, the impacts on the victims who are subject to that. So I think the kind of thinking about the individual, whether it's victim survivors or whether it's perpetrators or even whether it's bystanders, is really complex because we're dealing with a real diversity here. But in addition to that, we have survivors who experience intersectional harms. So, you might have someone who, like a young Indigenous person, for example, who's navigating the experience that they had, but also the barriers around seeking help. Maybe they are reluctant to report their experience to the police because in the past they've had traumatic experiences with the police. And so designing a tool that is across all of those things is a challenge, but it's something that I think obviously needs to be aspired to. So that is why a survivor-centered tool is absolutely crucial. And what do we mean by a survivor-centered tool? We mean we need to center the experiences. This is what design justice is. It's designing with, not just for, but it's centering the experiences of affected communities in the design justice process. So, whether that's using research with victim survivors, which is what we did, with the development of UmiBot, but it's also about designing the aesthetics of the tool, the functionality of the tool, the content of the tool, the evaluation of the tool with community. So, for example, with UmiBot version 1, we did interviews, we did consultations, we did focus groups where we did some co-designs around the look of UmiBot, what kind of design features did we want to adopt. We do, our process wasn't perfect, and we're with the UmiBot version 2, we're really hoping to do a much more grounded co-design process where from the very outset we have youth engaged in the design process right to the very end. So it's not just kind of at various points of the design process. And I know I'm talking too much, but I just also wanted to mention about trauma. And I think a trauma-informed approach to designing these digital tools is obviously very important, because we need to recognize that for some people, whether it's image-based abuse or whether it's domestic and family violence or sexual violence, whatever the experience that they're bringing to the chat or to the tool, whatever that tool might be, is that tool needs to be aware of the diversity of experiences, the lived experiences of victim survivors, and the way in which distress and harms can be quite different for different victim survivors.
Thank you. And I really like this whole concept of that nothing for survivors without them, and bringing on survivors in that design, and how that design, when coming from their advice and coming from that user experience, can really be helpful for the community. I mean, at the clinic, we have a lot of experience in that work. And we don't have an AI-based tool at the clinic, Nicola, but we do have a tool which is called Rise Above Risk. And that tool is based on algorithm, and our process was very similar. So what you're saying really resonates for me. But some of the people are asking this in chat, and I also have this question, that gender-based violence organizations are very, very cautious about AI. And while for most of us, it is entering in our administrative tasks on its own, without invitation, actually, right? If you're using Microsoft or you're using Google, it's just showing up everywhere for you. If organizations are thinking of incorporating AI, what are essential guardrails? If you can help us think through those, whether it is at policy level or practical level. I'm thinking about privacy, I'm thinking about confidentiality for staff and survivors, but also if people have not started conversations, how do they get to this complicated and complex conversation of using AI in GBV spaces?
So thanks, Deepa. I'm not an expert on AI in workplaces, but I do obviously work on AI in gender-based violence contexts, including deepfakes and survivor support tools. So I'll answer from that perspective. For gender-based violence organisation, I think there are four key guardrails. The first is purpose. So being really clear about why AI is being used and ensuring that it genuinely improves safety and access to support rather than just a tool of efficiency. The second guardrail is what I've already mentioned is, tools need to be trauma informed. They need to have behind them survivor-centered design. I would also say, like specific tools for gender-based violence also need to be based on kind of research evidence and theory. Like I think, I think that's really important, like theoretical frameworks that underpin these particularly the chatbots, I think is really important. So that also involves clear boundaries on what AI can and can't do. Non-judgmental language is really important. Easy pathways to human support. And I think it's really important, and this is something that we've been very clear to do with both UmiBot version 1 and UmiBot version 2, but it's been very clear to set expectations about what these systems can and can't do. The third safeguard is around misuse, especially for generative tools. So, I mean, this probably refers more to the deepfake generators that I was speaking about, but of course, misuse can happen in different ways in the workplace, including within gender-based violence workplaces as well. But obviously preventing things like creating sexualized or impersonation outputs, adding friction for harmful uses, and having clear reporting and takedown pathways. And finally, and the kind of fourth guardrail that I would say is important is around governance and accountability. So internal policies are important, staff training, transparency with clients. So that's around, again, about the clarity about expectations, but also clarity about who's responsible in the workplace when something goes wrong. And I guess what I'd say too is that ultimately gender-based violence organisations shouldn't adopt AI just because it's available. And I think all the organisations here would absolutely be on board with that. But also just to say that AI is already here, it's not going away. And I think the question is whether isn't whether GBV, gender-based violence organisations, should engage with AI. We already do, and we should. But it's how AI is engaged with. And I think organisations can get involved early, can help shape those guardrails, can help shape the standards and the policies within the workplace, and also help to empower victim survivors with tools that actually can help them. And so there's real opportunity here to engage critically and proactively rather than being left out of a space, so that gender-based violence expertise, the amazing expertise of gender-based violence practitioners, can contribute to shaping support, prevention, and AI responses to harm.
Nicola, I'll ask you a question, which is coming up in our Q&A, like in our Google Doc, but it is also something that is related to my own thought process around accountability and also the implications of AI. And the question is twofold. The first one being, you have shared with us, so clearly the implications of deepfake abuse, synthetic impersonation, and automated harassment, right? Like all of those issues that we should be very, very be careful about, and the unintended consequences of usage of AI. You have also alarmed us of those pieces. So the two questions that I have in the context of that, one, do you see that it is going to replace that human service element? Are we at the brink of losing that human, compassionate, empathetic service delivery? That's one. And on the other hand, along with that, what I want to hear from you is, from your perspective, what does that real accountability looks like when something does go wrong using AI? So do you think that there is any possibility of loss in this, or if we are careful enough, we can actually gain and lose less?
Yeah, thank you. They're excellent questions. Look, I guess I'll start by saying that emphatically that AI is not, that should not and cannot be seen as a replacement for relational care, for trust, for nuanced safety planning, for emotional containment. But I think AI can be used, so chatbots, for example, can be used as stepping stones to getting that human support. And I mean, just I'll kind of use a personal experience. When I was younger, and I used to, have worries and anxieties like a lot of young people do. It'd be the middle of the night and, there'd be no humans to, my humans were asleep. So my parents and my siblings, not that I would have talked to them anyway, to be honest. But I don't really have, I guess I had myself to talk to, but I had these, I think I had like a Cosmopolitan or a Dolly magazine or something like that. And they had runes and, I would just select a rune and it would give me some sage advice. Now, I knew at the time that it was kind of like obviously not a human person, um, kind of generic, and so on and so forth. But it really gave me, I remember when I was younger, it gave me reassurance when I didn't have a human person to speak to. And as an adult, and I'm kind of, I don't know if I should admit this, but I sometimes, if I'm not sleeping at night, I will go into the kitchen and I'll get out the tarot cards and the same thing. I'll get some reassurance in the middle of the night when my partner's asleep and I can't wake him up, and when there's no human person to speak to. Now, recently I had this terrible dream and I woke up in the middle of the night and had this terrible anxiety. So I'm using this example because I think it's helpful to just again to demonstrate them when there isn't human support available and you're in a state of distress, that a chatbot can actually be quite useful. So it was the middle of the night, it was like 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep. Instead of getting out the tarot cards, I decided to chat to ChatGPT. So I was careful about what I disclosed, but I was struck actually by how reassuring the conversation was. And like in some ways, it was more reassuring than what my partner would have delivered to me, particularly in the middle of the night. Um, but I did also feel afterwards like, oh gosh, now ChatGPT knows that, I couldn't sleep. My mum passed away last year, so a little bit of a conversation with ChatGPT about mum, and ChatGPT knows that, sometimes I have anxiety. And so I, um, you know, mindful that, I'm disclosing to something that is actually not human, that's not real. And I think a lot of people do from our focus groups with young people last year. A lot of young people straddle this tension that they do want to speak to a human person, but they're not always the right time. Sometimes they can't get hold of a human person. Sometimes it costs money to see a human person, like a counselor or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. That can take weeks, and sometimes you just need support then and there. But the young people also said that they didn't want to tell ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever other chat bot that they were using their private stuff. So it's a real tension. And I think that's why UmiBot, we designed UmiBot, is to try and, it's not like a generic LLM chatbot that may not be safe and may not be private. We don't really know, but can provide the support and information and advice that a person might need in that time. So I know that's a really long-winded way of answering your question, but hopefully it just gives a bit of, I guess, like warning around reliance on chatbots to provide that emotional support. But I think we need to recognize the realities is that people don't always want to speak to a human person. Sometimes it's quite nice chatting to a chatbot. I mean, I'm always so polite with humans, but with ChatGPT, sometimes I'm a bit abrupt. And that can be quite liberating, particularly for people-pleasing type personalities. Your question about accountability when things go wrong, I guess it depends on the tool that we're talking about. If we're talking about a carefully designed chatbot that has all the safety and privacy protections in place. That's been tested. They call it red teaming to test what would happen with malicious actors, to really make sure that the chatbot is watertight. Then those tools obviously can be more likely to be trusted. But I guess there's always room for harm. And even with our chatbot, there might be possibilities that someone discloses something and the chatbot doesn't respond in the way that it should. All I can say is that I think it's so important for iterative design, meaning always monitoring, always updating. And unfortunately, that's really time intensive and resource intensive, which is why you kind of need funding, proper funding to fund these tools, and proper research behind the tools to test them, and proper testing phases as well before you make the tool live. Look, I don't really have the answer to your question about broadly around accountability for like chatbots like ChatGPT, Gemini, and so forth, when they deliver information that's harmful to victim survivors. There should be accountability, is all I can say. I think the problem with chatbots is that accountability gets diffused. I think with AI it gets diffused. I think people using notified tools to create content. It's like, who's accountable here? Is it the tech companies? Is it the individual users? Is it the society? And I think your question is a brilliant one around accountability. I personally am keen to, in our next UmiBot version 2 stage, is to really explore what would happen if our chatbot did deliver harmful information. Who's accountable? How do we put in place accountability measures? And I'm certainly keen to explore this more. And so I'm sorry they haven't given you a better response to that, but I think it's a really important question.
So Nicola, I mean, I really, really deeply appreciate a couple of things, what you have just said, that, you're saying that a tool, a well-designed, a tool designed with justice and trauma-informed practice in mind, like UmiBot, can create a bridge for people who may not be ready to talk to another human being. So that, I think, is a great place to put a pin on and think about where AI can be helpful and where AI can actually be supportive. And you also raise very good point that since the GBV work deeply, deeply depends on trust, human connection, and that compassion, care. So we should never think of that any of these tools can replace our existing services. We can just think about this is another tool in our box, but it's not the replacement. And this striking this right balance between the automated support and the care, the trauma-informed and survivor-centric care, is where I think the reduction of the re-traumatization and the risks of the re-traumatization is somewhere sitting, and we should not be encouraging people for over-reliance on these tools. And when I think about the accountability piece also, I think something that I think about is that if we come to the space of helping design the tools the way we want those tools to be designed, probably that's where accountability also will start coming in. I think we need feminist voices in the design. And unless and until we don't take that space and don't occupy that space will be occupied by people who can cause harm. I don't know what your thought. I mean, you're clearly occupying that space from your end, and you're doing your bit. But I don't know what your response to something like that would be. Do you think
So
that
I
there
would
is? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, look, I think that's so important. So these like working on AI tools, it cannot be just the people with the technical know-how. If you have, I mean, there's certainly cases of people who are engineers and computer scientists who have no knowledge at all of gender-based violence, who are creating tools, and don't understand the harms. They don't understand the unintended consequences, and there can be real harms there. So for example, I'll just use an example here, like some chatbots that we experimented with. I remember there was one, it was specifically for domestic and family violence and sexual violence survivors. And I remember just experimenting and typing into the chat, I've been raped or I've been sexually assaulted, and the chatbot coming back and saying, I don't understand what you mean. Even though, so, so I mean, or I need to report to the police, and the chatbot coming back and saying, can you please rephrase your question? I don't understand what you mean. Now, this is chatbot technology has advanced so much since then. But I think, that potentially could be harmful to someone who's gone to the chatbot to get some kind of support and then has received a response like that. Equally, though, if it was just me as a gender-based violence researcher designing a tool, we'd be in trouble because I'm not a computer scientist, I'm not an engineer, I'm, not even that great with technology. I'm okay, but I'm not that great. So that's why it's so important in the design of the tool. It's a collaborative effort. It's a community effort. It requires the coming together of the tech people with the social science and gender-based violence experts, but also, as I said, the victim survivors, even potentially people who cause harm, bystanders as well, experts, and really bringing together a community of expertise to design something that is robust, both from a content perspective, but also a design perspective. Sorry, I didn't mention that, like user experience experts are important as well, UX, and also, of course, the developers. And if you don't have that interdisciplinary team of experts designing the tool, there are real dangers there. And look, that's a challenge too, because sometimes we speak different languages. So sometimes the people I work with, the tech people, I don't always, I didn't know what red teaming was until not that long ago. Or, guardrails. I mean, obviously we're all more familiar with the term guardrails, but there's a whole language, and we have language too that we use, that we don't maybe recognize that the computer scientists that we're working with might not understand that language. So it's a real opportunity, and I love that. I love the idea of working in a team of different people with different skills and expertise and coming together to produce something that actually can be helpful and useful for victim survivors, but also bystanders and perpetrators as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicola. So I'm turning my attention more clearly to the questions from the audience now. So I'll maybe take a couple. I think we have a few more minutes left. So the first one is specifically for YumiBot. So one of our audience members are asking, could you expand on YumiBot's value to survivors as a resource versus an accessibly written resource guide to law and available services? So I think you spoke about it earlier, but maybe if you want to expand something a little more.
So yes, thank you for your question. Look, YumiBot, as I said, there's two versions. There's YumiBot version 1 and YumiBot version 2. With YumiBot version 1, it's not, as I said, a dynamic conversation. Like YumiBot won't remember what you said in the chat a few minutes before. Whereas with YumiBot version 2, there's using generative AI to really be able to have a conversation. So I guess the YumiBot version 1 is limited in the way of like it's less as a disclosure tool, like almost like a quasi counseling tool. It was never designed to be a counseling tool. It was always just giving information about what supports are available, what the laws are, reassurance that it's not your fault, all those kind of things. But wasn't so much about, the victim survivor being able to type in the free text button about how they were feeling, and for the chatbot to give that reassurance around that, so that emotional kind of support. Whereas YumiBot version 2 does straddle both of those things. So it is about giving information and advice and support, but also has the capacity to respond when someone is in a state of high distress. So one of the feedback that we got from YumiBot version 1 was that it wasn't there's a lot of information that it was giving to victim survivors, and for victim survivors who were in a high state of distress, an overload of information, an overload of text could be quite overwhelming. So that's why we really wanted to design UmiBot version 2, just to make sure that it could play those two roles, depending on what the user wanted. So it's really kind of asking, similar to ChatGPT, actually, like, do you want some more information? Do you want to just talk about your experience, or do you want me to provide some information about where you can go for support?
Thank you, Nicola. So the next question is related to role of education. So you spoke about, the 4 different pieces that are needed as we move through prevention of harmful AI behavior. And the question exactly is, can you speak more about the education and cultural aspect of addressing this issue in the way AI negatively impacts our spaces?
Yeah, thank you. I'm really interested in this as one of the key ways in which to address this problem, because we have obviously the tech developers and the platforms, but we really need to think about how do we design education in a way that prevents these behaviours from happening in the first place. So I just want to say something about contextual prevention. It's a framework that we've been looking into around image-based abuse and deepfake abuse. Part of that is removing opportunities for people. So making accessing tools like notify tools more difficult, because I think at the moment they're so easy to access, and that's why we're getting kind of so-called new perpetrators engaging in these behaviours. But removing access to the tools isn't going to be the whole way to solve the problem. We really need to make sure that we have in place really good digital citizenship education, respectful relationships education. So this is part of raising awareness in schools and universities and other educational institutions around what constitutes a respectful relationship, particularly around intimate images as well. So we have obviously decades long of educational interventions in schools, teaching young people about what consent looks like in sexual in-person interactions. But unfortunately, the consent education and respectful relationships education can be quite uneven in relation to intimate images. So there's still a lot of kind of victim blaming around, that people, girls and women shouldn't be sharing their intimate content in the first place. So there can still be that kind of narrative that comes through some of the educational programs. Obviously some of these programs are trying to prevent image-based abuse, but actually what they do is they end up putting the blame and responsibility on often the girl or the woman and depicted in the image. So I think consent is really important around intimate images. I think there's still a misunderstanding around notify tools, for example, that it's just fun, that it's like you're just, it's not real. And so raising awareness around for young people about the harms of deepfake abuse is really important, because I think some young kids just don't understand. I think it's funny. To turn a social media photo of a girl in their class into a sexualized image. They don't understand that actually, when the person depicted in the image is under the age of 18 or 16 or whatever the age might be, that it does constitute a form of child sexual abuse, and that can have serious implications. And the other thing I just mentioned too is around digital and porn literacy. There's a lot of attention happening at the moment around that, which I think is really good, to make sure that young people understand. I mean, that's where consent is obviously important, but to be able to look critically at content that has been created online, whether that's fake content or so-called real content. I think education is really probably the most important solution to the problem of technology facilitated gender-based violence, but it's not the only solution. And I think this is why we need to have so many different things pulled into the mix here including laws and including regulations and platform action as well.
So this will be probably my last audience question that I'm able to take for the conversation. Nicola, the question that we have here is, can you please speak more about Humibot's security and environmental impact, given that it's an AI generated as compared to, say, a website, for example, which we know uses um, less resources. So I'm sure you have answered this question before.
It's funny because I actually ran out of time to go into detail, and I was hoping that someone would ask me this question because I do have an answer to that question. With Humibot version 1 and Humibot version 2, privacy and safety by design were obviously of great importance to us as we design and develop the tool. So really thinking about privacy protection and safety at the forefront of design, not as an afterthought or an add-on. So we undertook a rigorous multi-staged privacy impact assessment in full consultation with the RMIT University Privacy Officer and also legal counsel. And we also consulted with privacy experts. So as part of that assessment, we undertook a detailed analysis of Australian privacy law. We mapped all the data flows in our conversations with Humibot to identify potential privacy risks. So, for example, users inadvertently disclosing personal information, and we design strategies to mitigate those potential privacy risks. We do not record conversations with users. That's for both Humibot version 1 and Humibot version 2. So there's no record of what users might discuss with Humi. We do, however, collect de-identified and aggregate information about how the chatbot is used. So, for example, the total number of users, the most frequented pathways and topics, and we do that for research purposes as well. We have a publicly available privacy information statement, which is on the Humibot website. It aligns with the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner's best practice guidelines. And we use plain and understandable language to outline the information that users need to take on board for making an informed decision about using the tool. So basically, Humibot version 1, that's as well as Humibot version 2, is designed around data minimization and non-retention. So just to clarify, we do not store user conversations, we do not require accounts, we do not use we do not build user profiles. User messages are not stored, logged, or reused for training or fine-tuning. There's no transcripts, there's no history. And also we have various safety by design mechanisms in place as well around safety risks involved of using the tool. We did a cybersecurity assessment, and we also did a accessibility compatibility assessment as well. So we've got a statement about accessibility for people with disabilities. We did that. We got an audit from an independent accessibility assessor. And yeah, there's a whole lot more I could say, but I know we've run out of time, but thank you for your questions.
Thank you so much, Nicola, for your thoughtful engagement. And thank you to everyone who asked questions. I apologize, I couldn't ask all of your questions. I tried my best. So I'm just, in closing, reminded of a quote by Audre Lorde. She says that there is no such thing as single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. So it's kind of a powerful reminder for me that, like violence, technology also does not exist in isolation, and our solutions for the situations that we are facing cannot also be living in isolation. So thank you for being part of the conversation and inviting me to the conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepa, and thanks, Margarita, and thank you to you all for coming today. Thank you.